for having me and for your attention and engagement. I always get reminded that time is probably the most precious resource we all have as a startup, other than money. And I appreciate and am humbled that you are spending some time with me today. I am going to, of course, tell you about myself, and then I am going to give you some high level and macro things to think about in terms of fundraising. And then I'm going to walk you through 3 or 4 steps that I've identified in the fundraising process, from prospecting to closing. And it's going to be very tactical in nature. And this is a 3-hour block that's been reserved. And I think it could go an hour and a half, or I think it could go 3 hours, or it probably could even go many hours after that. But a lot of it has to do with you guys and your engagement. So if you're asking lots of questions and you're getting lots of value, I'm happy for it to take the whole block. If there aren't a lot of questions, I probably will not just talk for 3 hours without any interaction, because that would be probably boring for us all. But so if you do have questions and you do want to interact throughout the process, just send a message in chat, or feel free to just come on and interject. If I think you have a great point, but I haven't gotten to it yet, I'll probably say, hey, that's a great point or a great question. We're going to get to that. Or if it makes sense to answer, I'll go ahead and do it. But I would love for you guys to engage and ask lots of questions, so I can make sure that you're learning also what you need to learn. Give me a second while I pull up a presentation. Can you guys see this? It should say how to rock the pitch.
Yes, please.
Okay,
Yes,
perfect.
please.
Good. What I'm realizing, if I go, is there a way I could share my screen and see the chat? Is there any Microsoft Team experts? I'm a Zoom guy. All right. Well, it just means that I'll have to stop and check for a chat. No big deal. Okay.
I'll also be checking for you, Derrick. So no issue.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. So everyone, my name is Derrick Disenfield. I am the co-founder of GSD Venture Studios. But I always tell people that first and foremost, I'm an entrepreneur. I've been starting businesses since I was 7 years old, and I started selling baseball cards on the side of the road. And since then, I've been a part of $0 failures and $2 billion exits, and pretty much everything in between. I am not an engineer, but I've been everything from product to growth to CEO to COO kinds of roles. I also, for context, started, built, and sold a storytelling marketing firm where we built online and offline communities for medium-sized and large brands. And then prior to GSD Venture Studios, I sat on the other side of the table at Bunker Labs, where I seeded 350 startups that raised $100 million in follow-on capital. GSD Venture Studios is a cross-border venture studios where we partner with engineers from around the world, typically outside of the United States, and we invest, build, and grow companies alongside them. So not like a pure venture capital firm where you're just sitting there and making an investment and maybe you have a board seat. We take operational roles inside of the company as a venture studio and help them grow. We also have an accelerator just like this. We're also filing a $250 million SPAC for AI and quantum companies, kind of for the opposite end of an accelerator for growth. So I've really seen startups from all stages, all genres, from all over the world. This is just some of the countries that have gone through our accelerator, for example. There's many more. So I'm happy to answer very detailed questions. First, I want to give some just high-level tips on fundraising. But what I want to first say is, and what I want to kind of portray is, there's many ways to plant a seed, and there's many ways to get to the goal of raising money. And I think the frustrating thing is there's not a silver bullet answer. But I'm going to kind of go through some things that have worked for me in the past as an entrepreneur, as an accelerator leader, and with our venture studio. And I'm also going to try to be blunt, because I think a lot of times not all the material that you find online is honest. And so I'm going to kind of tell you when I think, or at least I disagree with the conventional wisdom. So here's some laws on how to rock the pitch and how to get funded. I think the first thing that you need to remember whenever you are pitching your company, your startup, is you're actually pitching three things at once. And there's a guy, his name is Jordan Belfort, and you might not know who he is, but he's actually the real life character that Leonardo DiCaprio played in The Wolf of Wall Street. And The Wolf of Wall Street was about this guy who went on Wall Street and did some shady things and did a bunch of sex, drugs, and rock and roll and wound up in jail. But the real life character actually reformed himself after he got out of prison and has traveled around the world talking about sales, because he was an incredible salesperson. For those of you that saw the movie, probably remember that. And what Jordan Belfort talks about really resonates with me. He talks about something called straight line selling. And every time you are selling your startup to investors, or for those of you that don't like the word selling, persuading investors to invest in you, you have three things that you need to persuade them is good or great. And that is yourself, your team, and your product. And the theory of straight line selling is that if you think about as a line from 0 to 10 on yourself, 0 to 10 on your team, 0 to 10 on your product, when you start with a VC, you're at 0 on all three. He doesn't know you that well. He doesn't know your team. He doesn't know your product. And your goal is to move yourself farther away from that 0 and closer to that 10 as much as you can. And I think that keeping in mind that you're selling yourself, your team, and your product is paramount. I see a lot of startups that love to talk about their product. They love to talk about their product. And they forget to talk about the team. And it's subtle. They forget to say things like what we have done, what our team has done, what our outstanding CTO has developed and made scalable. They get shy when it comes to themselves. They forget to mention they have a PhD. They forget to mention all the things that they have done, which makes their startup the culmination of their career and why they are the right leader with the right team and the right product. And so I just think you need to keep that in mind. It's a multitasking thing where you're constantly looking for ways to plug yourself at the right moment, the team and the product all at the right moment. The second thing that I would say is don't suck at email and presentations. So starting with presentations first, I can't tell you how many times founders will outsource the building of their decks. And we've all done that as entrepreneurs. And I'm not saying not to do that, but I also think you need to get good at building the decks yourself, because you have to be able to create multiple presentations with very short notice. And if that means getting good at PowerPoint or Keynote or Figma, whatever your jam is, it doesn't really matter, but you have to be able to deliver presentations quickly. Because it's not so much redoing your first deck over and over again, although you should update it. Like if you had your deck set and ready to go and then COVID happens, you need to be able to update that deck before your venture capital meetings, after your strategy sessions with your team. Now that's obviously an extreme situation, but you have to be able to make those presentations. Now, in terms of email, there's two things that I mean. Number one is you have to be able to just simply respond to emails quickly on your phone, in elevators, at night, in the morning, all the time. If I was not concerned with your mental health and well-being, I would say you have to be able to respond to VC's emails 24/7. And that does not mean just okay or thank you or understood. That means you have to be able to capture what the next steps are and say those things very swiftly and effectively. Typically, I tell people you should remember that VCs typically read emails on phones and they don't want to scroll. And so getting as much as you can where they could just glance at a phone that's effective and persuasive is an art that you should not underestimate. Okay. One of the questions that I get a lot is about follow-up and passion. And sometimes founders believe that they're following up too much, or they don't know if they're coming off too excited where they'll look bad. Or another word for passion is maybe their mission comes off too big and they think they need to dial it down. I would say that nobody doesn't get funded because they followed up too much or they're too passionate about their idea. Nobody does not get funded because they followed up too much or were overly passionate. Now, I'll tell you the reason why some people don't get funded, and that's right here, is because you're just a jerk. And so there is a little bit of a fine line between being a jerk and following up too much, or if you didn't move that needle from 0 to 10 far enough, certainly. But generally speaking, investors want entrepreneurs that are aggressive, excited, believe that they're going to change the world, are a little bit on the crazy side, versus ones that are passive and are not excited or do not follow up. What I'm getting at in terms of follow-up is everybody has their own style. I personally just wouldn't overthink it. I mean, you send a VC an email, I would treat them just like anybody else. If you sent your mother an email, how long would you give her to respond before you sent another one? Or you called her on the phone, or you shot her a text, or you reached her on Facebook. I wouldn't treat them abnormally. Whatever you do to maintain relationships with important people, translate that to VCs. Don't put them on a pedestal that they don't need to be on, where you're going through all these use cases. Well, like, I waited 3 days last time and then he responded on day 4 and now it's day 5. So I think I'll just, follow up. Now, one of the things that I think gets missed is the object of a meeting with a venture capitalist is not to get funded. The object of a meeting with a venture capitalist is not to get funded. The objective of a meeting is to get to the next meeting. The objective of the meeting is to get to the next meeting, not to get funded. So, and it's almost like a romantic relationship, just to clarify. Of course, you'll eventually want to get funded, but eventually you'll get the second meeting, the third meeting, the fourth meeting, and it will be time to hand that investor the pen and they will sign it. I oftentimes use the metaphor of romantic relationships. The object of dating is to get to the next date, and eventually there's a connection and the magic happens. And investments is very much like that. So how does this work in practice? Once a VC agrees to meet again, the first thing you should do is pull out a calendar and book that meeting. The second thing you should do is try to exit as fast as you can from there. The objective is done. Do not try to continue to sell or get them to write a check or her to write a check then. Once you get that next meeting, it is over. The second thing, how this works in practice, is VCs will say to you, oh, this was a great meeting. Send me this, this, and this. And, we'll go from there. And, you need to remember that your objective is not to send them anything. Your objective is to get to the next meeting. So the way that works in practice is, absolutely, Mrs. VC, I will send you the financials and my PowerPoint and the video I mentioned. But there's some unique things in my financials because our business has some nuances that I mentioned earlier. Can we set a 15-minute call where I could go through them with you? No, just send it over. I need my analysts to take a look at it. Okay. So you send it over because you don't suck at email. You probably should do it in the parking lot because you don't suck at email and you respond quickly. And so from the parking lot, dear Mr. and Mrs. VC, I had a great meeting. And we'll talk more about emails in a second. But the point is, in the closing, as I mentioned during our meeting, I would love the opportunity to discuss these with you in person. I'm available Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of next week at this time. Let me know what works. The object is to get to the next meeting. Don't forget that. It's not just to send stuff and then follow up. It's to get to a meeting. This gets discussed a lot. I should probably take this slide out, but there's, two acronyms which I do think you need to be aware of. I think FOMO gets discussed a lot, fear of missing out. I think that is true. I think it's a little harder than conventional wisdom to create that FOMO. I don't think you can just rush VCs. I do think that when I used to do events with my event marketing firm, the way that we would get celebrities and politicians to come to events is we used to tell the politicians that celebrities were coming. And then we used to tell the celebrities that politicians were coming. And then they would call each other and check and be like, yeah, I was invited and I was thinking of coming. And oftentimes it would get them to come. So I do think that one of the things that I see inexperienced entrepreneurs do is they don't talk about who's funded them thus far. If somebody writes you a check or has promised to write you a check, name them. Andreessen Horowitz is agreed to come in for $1 million round. Tell them specifically. There's nothing proprietary about who's investing in you. It's a good thing because you want them to pick up the phone and call each other and talk about each other. Now, as far as fear of looking stupid, and this is where the balancing point comes from, fear of missing out on something unique and innovative versus looking bad. And VCs are actually much more concerned with fear of looking stupid than fear of missing out, although they don't admit it, but they are. And one of the things that I think you need to do is you always need to be different and be unique in some areas, but not in every area humanly possible. I mean, and what I mean by that is use the vendors, use the things that are typical in startups, and look as much like a successful startup as you can. So in the United States, almost all startups use Gmail. If that's true in Nigeria, use that. Use the systems and the processes that will not have an impact on your startup's overarching unique strategy, but also do make you like everybody else. Another thing is when you're describing your startup, try to do it when you're describing the unique parts, try to do it in a way that is comparable to what is normal. So that way it is unique, but not so far-fetched that you're going to be unable to accomplish it. Let me give you an example. Everybody has heard of software as a service business model, SaaS. You may say, I don't really want to do SaaS for a variety of reasons. We had an ad tech company and they weren't SaaS, and it was always hard for people to wrap their heads around. And one of the things that they did is they had a bidding model where they would use AI to make faster and better bids for brands in real time. So what we called it was bidding as a service. So it wasn't a software SaaS like investors love, like everything else, but it was a BaaS, a bidding as a service business model. And so it was like easy for them to compute in their brains quickly. And it wasn't such a far-fetched business model because it was very similar to SaaS and it sounded like SaaS. And so finding those comparables where, yes, you're different and unique, but it's not that crazy compared to everything else that's currently on the market. Okay. So what I want to do before I get to this is see, does anyone have any questions about what I ran through? Okay. So what I want to do now, and if you have questions, I put my link tree so you guys into the chat, and you can reach out to me that way if you rather talk privately, which is totally fine. But what I want to do now is talk a little bit more tactically. Okay, can you guys see my screen again? Still? Okay. Hopefully.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So here is the kind of the 4 stages that I wanted to kind of walk through in how I would focus on investors, and how I would get funded. And so let's go through these in order. Okay. So the first and the last bullet point, you probably will roll your eyes at me, but I would say that your initial, and there's supposed to be a dash there. Let me just put it there because it'll drive me nuts. But we always talk about your initial round of funding should be the triple Fs, right? The friends, the families, the fools, people that you can get to get your startup off the ground that will believe in you. In terms of the straight line selling, you're really only you might sell your idea a little bit, but you're really falling back on your relationship. And there's perhaps a 4th F in that group, which is the founders, which might not be friends, but founders that you know who have gone through what you're going through. But I would say that some people don't like to do friends, families, and fools. I don't think it's mandatory. I think that one of the things that you need to think about if this is your first venture and is that this probably isn't going to be your last. And if it's your first time raising money and it's your first startup, I do not believe that you should focus on optimizing your rounds for financial gain. If it's your first time funding, in my opinion, you should not be optimizing your round. You should be focusing on getting money in the bank and getting the experience. And let me just explain something to you. If you become Flutterwave or Paystack, that optimization of rounds does not matter. If you're going to build $1 billion company, trust me, you're going to turn out okay. The optimizing of rounds and the game theory that you read about in all these blogs really applies for like medium-sized exits. And really, as a first-time founder, you're dreaming big, you're thinking big. You might not have a lot of experience. I do not believe you should waste a lot of time, money, and effort gamifying, what your equity stake is going to be per round. I read it needs to be 20%. There's no way I'm giving up 33%, because that's just wrong. I personally think you're wasting time and effort and resources on something that you really don't need to be doing. If you get a Paystack, if you get a Flutterwave, if you get a Google, you're going to be just fine. And yeah, if you have a smaller exit, maybe you would lose out on a few million because you didn't optimize your round. But as a first-time founder, you're just not really in the position to do that. And I'm talking about that in terms of friends, families, and fools. Is a lot of times people are nervous about friends, families, and fools because they don't want to give them a fair deal. I would give them a fair deal. And I would get yourself funded and get your company off the ground if you can. Okay. A second thing that I want to show you guys is, and this is one of those things that I think investors just simply are not honest about, or I've just simply not seen to be true, and as forthright as I think they could be, or at least I don't see it in blogs. Okay. Another tactic that you can use is you need to gather a list of as many investors as you possibly can. Okay. And there are 2 or 3 places where you can gather lists. Before I show you angel lists and NFX, one place that you can gather lists is if you see a VC webinar and VCs are on it, I would take their names down. I would take their names down and their firm if you have it. Now, I'll talk about what to do next. But right now, the first thing you need to do is you need to gather a list of VC names. And so if you see a webinar like advertised on Twitter or online and I'm raising money, oh, that's a VC. I'm grabbing his name. I'm grabbing her name. I'm grabbing that name and I'm putting that in a Google Doc. And then another thing that I would do, and can you guys see angel lists? Tell me if you can.
Yes, please.
Okay, cool. All right. So the other thing I would do is, if you don't have a profile on Angel List, create one. And you don't have to optimize your profile for this. So what I would do is I would go here. Sorry, I went to the wrong spot. Give me a second. Go to more and then go to investors. And then what I would do is I would click everyone. And then I would type fintech. That gives me 20,000 results. Most of these investors are angels, hint the name, which is good for early stage. If you want, you can put in Africa or Nigeria. Let's see what happens then. Now that lowers it to 274, which is still a lot of investors. So it's up to you what you want to do. I might do both. But then what I would do is, depending on funds, I would capture as many of these. I would put the name and profile in a list on a Google Sheet. Just his name, Control C. I would put his name and profile in as many as you can. My computer's going a little slow. Just give me a second. Just like this. Okay, and I would add as many of these guys as I could. If I could afford a personal assistant that I could find online, or I wanted to pay a friend, I would get all 20,000 of them if you can. Or if you want to do it yourself and spend 5 or 6 hours, I think it's worth it. And again, all you need is their name and profile, okay? Now, another place, and I'll show you what to do next, but another place, what you're doing is there's a website called NFX, which is also a VC shop, but they have kind of a cool way to meet investors. And these are more venture capitalists that you can find, and you could search by sector. So here's fintech. And you can, find them. It's pretty easy. But all you're doing here is just name and firm. the reason why you're doing the name and angel lists, because most of the people are not tied to a firm. Okay. Now, this same list is if you find a webinar, find names from a webinar. So like if I put in Nigeria investor webinar, I would capture these guys' names, capture these guys' names, and I would just put where they are. And you guys know what I mean. Maybe these aren't the right ones, but as you come across them. Then what I would do, step number 3, is I would put a column here titled email. And obviously I would, shrink this down and make it a little easier. Then I would put a column here titled email. And the way that I would get these investors' email, there's 2 ways, and there's software that can find emails, or you can just go on Fiverr and hire somebody who will find emails. It's usually around 20 to 25 cents US dollars per email. Or you can just search for them yourself, depending on funds. And another option would be is I have a guy that I use if you're having trouble finding one or finding one that you trust. I can connect you to the guy that I use. And so then once you have all of the emails, this is the unconventional wisdom. You email them. It works. And this notion that, VCs don't like cold emails and it doesn't work, I've just not seen that to be true. And I've had a lot of trust, or I've had a lot of success. Now, what I want to show you, and it's on this slide so you don't have to remember this, the way that I would email people is I would not do a MailChimp. I would use a service like this one. I like it because it's pretty inexpensive and you can cancel at any time. It's called GMass, and it's a plugin that's right in your Gmail. So it's super easy, and you can send emails that are customized to the VCs that do not look like newsletters. And this is where you need to get really good at writing emails. You can't suck at emails for sure, but you need to say something like, as short as possible. So don't say words like dear or hi. Just you just put their name in, and Gmail allows you to do that, or GMass, sorry. Something really short like this, and then put your bullet points of traction. And then your deck. And what's great about this GMass is you can put attachments in mass to everybody as well. And I would put your deck as a link and attachment. It makes it look real. Another thing that you could do is you can, add your, these are like marketing hacks, but you can do the sent from my cell phone, apologize for typos. What you're trying to do is not make them feel like it is spam and make it feel as, authentic and real as possible. And so, now another thing that you should do that I have is, I read about you online, or started to like just a call with you. Here's the deck and here's my Calendly. If you use Calendly, which is you can get that for free, so they can book a call easily and provide times. And again, all of this can be done in GMAS. It's super easy. Now, here is the point that you also don't hear a lot, and this is why I like GMAS, is you can schedule follow-ups. And I like these auto follow-ups. They'll get one that says, just making sure you saw this. And then this one is a little tough, but I've seen it work. And I would use those follow-ups and email them 2 or 3 times. I would say no less than 3 times. I might not do it after 2 days. I might do it after 4 days and like 8 days. But I would absolutely, positively be doing this. The second thing that I would say is, yes, you should do it to investors in Nigeria, on the continent, but I would also do it to Western investors. And I know what some of you guys are also thinking, well, AngelList only has 700 people in Nigeria or in Africa. I can't remember what we did. Well, then find another platform that I don't know about. But I think the point is, get the names, store the names. I keep my list right here. Whenever I get a list, an email for a VC, I add it to that list, and and then I go find it, whether I pay for a service, use something like hunter.io, but I'm constantly growing my list. Another thing that I do is, oftentimes VCs will CC partners. Well, those emails are going on my list because I might email them again, or, and that list should just grow and grow and grow. Let me just see. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about this part here? Okay. Another way that you can meet venture capitalists and investors, and it doesn't work for everybody, but is to do an event for VCs, or to have a podcast that interviews VCs. And this is kind of just, again, a little bit of a marketing hack, but rather than being like every other startup calling a VC to invest, you could be calling and saying, hey, I'm the CEO of this startup, but we're doing an event, how to invest in venture capital, or how to become a venture capitalist, or maybe it's a startup matchmaking event for VCs. And from what I found is, the most important thing that VCs care about in terms of participating in an event is how the materials look and how they're going to be presented. So if you could present a well-quality event, show them the flyer, and even proactively put their picture in it and show him or her how they will look and be displayed and how many people you're going to have come, that's a win. And so the point is, you can establish the relationship, and going back to straight line selling, you might not move your product or your team much, but you can establish that relationship and move yourself to the right with the investor. And then after the event, you could then follow up and use that relationship as a friendly that you would approach to invest in your company. And you could do the same thing by having a podcast. And so that's another thing. Again, it doesn't work for everybody, but I've seen it work pretty effectively. Now, the last one is usually the first one, and this is why I made it last, because there's lots of blogs, there's lots of thought leaders that will tell you to look at VC's theses, make a very short list of investors, and approach them based on their thesis. And so from my experience, it is just very, very hard if you're in your first time talking to VCs to wrap your head around their thesis completely. And it's not that you're stupid, but it's you just don't understand everything, and it does take a lot of your time. And so what does a thesis investor mean? Well, it means understanding the stage they invest in. Do they do pre-seed if it's your first time, or do they only do growth rounds? Understanding the verticals. Do they do fintech? Do they invest in fintech and Nigerian-based fintech? Do they have a portfolio of competitors of yours? What in their portfolio leads you to believe that they should invest in you? Not that you want them to invest in you, but what aligns for them where you would be a good investment for them. And not saying that it's wrong to do this. In many ways, it's the complete opposite approach of what I showed you with AngelList and NFX, but it is something to try and to understand. And I would argue that you could do both. You could have your focus list, and you can have your spray and pray list. Let me just think about. So, does anyone have any questions about what I've went through as far as locating and basically creating a prospect list of investors? Okay, perfect. All right, so a couple things once you get that meeting with investors. Story absolutely matters. And again, one of the things I talked about you and your team is, why is this startup the culmination of your lives, both personally and professionally? Like, how did you get here as a team where you all have decided that you are going to accomplish this problem? What was that awakening or light bulb moment? And how did you get here? And I would say that you shouldn't lie about this, but I also think you're building a legend. And, there's just this aura that the way Airbnb started was that Brian Chesky and the other founder didn't have a place to sleep and they slept on a couch and they said, wouldn't it be great if we could just rent out people's couches? And, maybe that's true or maybe it's not. And it doesn't really matter. But having that personal story, but also then tying it to your previous successes and your previous failures about how and why this has become your life mission and why it will be important with others absolutely matters. And part of the reason that you need to remember that story also matters is that one of the things that investors are judging is, can you, as the CEO and the founding team, not raise one round of capital, but can you raise 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe more rounds of capital that are going to fund this company to make it a unicorn? And that usually relies on an ongoing narrative and an ongoing story. Now, you have to couple that and partner the story matters portion to getting to traction. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've listened to startups pitch and they've gone 30 minutes or more and they haven't mentioned a single traction bullet point. Let me just tell you that if you are raising money only on your idea, it's going to be incredibly difficult. And let me tell you a true story that happened to me recently. One time I spoke to this guy from India. And he was telling me about his startup. He was telling me about how he grew up on a farm in India and he raised onions. And, as an American guy, you can't really hear sometimes the Indian accent. And I thought he said onions, like the vegetable. I said, you mean onions, like the vegetable? He's like, yeah, onions has been a part of my life since I was 7 years old. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, this guy's going to tell me about onions. So what did he do? He went on and told me about how he has created a decentralized blockchain that uses onions, or that transports onions and tracks onions on the supply cycle. And then he told me that I asked him, well, like, does this apply to other foods? He's like, I don't know. All I care about is onions. I haven't really thought about other foods. And I then asked him, well, can you tell me about, and this is 25 minutes into the chat, I'm starting to ask him questions. Can you tell me about what blockchain you use? He said, I don't even know. My CTO handles that. And at this point, I was furious at my partner, Gary. Like, why am I talking to this guy about onions? Except there was one question, which I'm so glad I asked, but I did. I said, well, tell me what your revenue is. He said, well, we do $1 million USD per month. And at this point, on minute 29, when we only had 30 minutes scheduled, he finally let the hen out of the bag that this guy has a company doing $1 million in MRR working with onions. And the point that I'm getting at is his whole narrative changes if he says something like, hey, I grew up loving onions. They've been a big part of my life. I put them on the blockchain technology to track them and make it easier for farmers to transport them. and we're really taking off. We have this many users, this much in ARR at this growth rate. He should get to that in 3 minutes. In fact, if you have a startup that's doing $1 million USD in MRR, you shouldn't even introduce your first name to people that you meet. You should say, hey, I have a company that does $1 million in MRR. What do you do? And obviously that is a joke, but you've got to get to the traction as fast as possible. Now, I think some of you are like, oh, great, I don't have traction and like, I guess I'll never raise money. I don't think that's true. I've never been able to find a startup that doesn't have some form of traction. Of course, some startups and many startups have better traction than others, but you all have done something that you can brag about. I've recruited a team with multiple PhDs. I've recruited an experienced team. We built a product in just a few months. We've interviewed from 0 to 50 people quickly so we could understand how the product works. All of those are traction. When you're thinking about traction, what you're really saying to the investor is, I know my idea is good because of these things. Because an investor, most investors will agree that it doesn't matter if they like your product or not. It doesn't mean anything if I like onions or not, or understand why a guy would start a business about onions. It doesn't matter. It only matters what the public thinks and what evidence does he have beyond his love of onions that building a blockchain technology for transporting them is a good idea. Well, for one, he's got $1 million in MRR. So if you think about it, is what have you been able to do to prove that your idea is good? That's what you need to do. What have you done so far to validate? The other thing that I think a lot of people miss is, why now? I think a lot of people believe that venture capitalists are in the fortune telling business. It's actually not true. They're in the present telling business. Venture capitalists are in the present telling business. So they are looking for startups that are not going to be successful in 2 years. They're looking for startups that are going to be successful next week. And oftentimes, it's not just about finding the right team. It's about the right time. And so focusing on the why now is vital. So for example, if you're not incorporating COVID-19 in your pitch, or if you're not incorporating the CBN regulatory environment in your pitch as a fintech company, you should, because everything that you're doing, you want to tie it to the relevance that's happening now. Here's what we're seeing in the regulatory environment, and it's changing the way fintechs are. Here's our reaction. This is what COVID-19 is doing. This is what the digital transformation that was propelled by COVID is doing. This is how open banking is impacting us, and why we're going to be so incredible, and why this is needed now. The point as it comes to your team, there's a line that I always use, and I would encourage you to use, because the use of this line requires you to also think about it. And that in terms of how you build your team. The way a lot of entrepreneurs ideate is they think of a great idea, they have a light bulb moment, and then they're like, okay, I know my friend John, who is an amazing coder. I know my friend Jack, who's a lawyer. I know my friend Derrick, who's great at sales. I'm going to just recruit them, and I'm going to film this company. And they're doing that because those are the ones they know. But the line that I want you to use when you pitch your team to investors and even to customers, I want you to say, we are the best team in the world to bring this idea to market. We are the best team in the world to bring this idea to market, and here is why. And the answer to that question is not, well, they're my buddies and they're the people I could find the fastest. So when you're thinking about your team and building your team and pitching your team, you know, you're the best team in the world to bring this idea to market. And here's the experiences that we have. Here's what we have done thus far to get this startup off the ground. Not the most convenient team. Another thing in terms of the pitch is remember how many people VCs see. So most venture capitalists or investors that are active will see around 6 companies a day. 6 times 5 is 30 companies a week, and that assumes that they didn't go to an event and met many, many more. 30 companies a week they've seen. And they all believe they're going to change the world. They all believe that they are the next fintech platform. And they all jumble together. Let me just tell you from experience. And so, number one, you have to be short and concise. You also should not assume that VCs remember who you are. So let me tell you how this plays out. You had a VC meeting Friday at 4 p.m. And let's say you got to have it at the VC's office. It doesn't matter. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. Okay, so it's over Zoom. You have the meeting. Meeting goes till 4:47. And it's the end of the day, end of the long week. You're going to have to work some over the weekend, but maybe you want to go out and get some dinner. And so you don't do what Derrick recommends. I recommend that as soon as you hit end, you send a follow-up email, but let's just say you don't. And let's just say the VC said, send me your financials and send me your deck. What I see a lot of people do is they'll put it off till Monday. Maybe they do it at the end of the day, Monday. So now that VC is seeing between 6 and 8 startups of what you've done. And you say, dear Jack, thanks for the meeting Friday. Here's the deck and financials that you asked for. So Jack, that VC, has no idea who you are. He can barely remember the meeting. And so you need to summarize quickly who you are and remind him or her the key things where you really saw their eyeballs light up. Jack, you really like the fact that you have you mentioned that you had a complementing portfolio company that we could work with and would work really well as far as investment prospects. Here's our attached deck, and here's our financials. As I mentioned on Friday, I'd love to discuss them with you. Here's my availability. When are you available? So remind them who you are, be concise, but also get to the next meeting. Okay. Who has questions? Someone must have one. No?
Questions, anyone? I think there's a hand up. That's James.
Hi, James.
Hi. Thank you so far, Derrick.
Oh, good.
I just wanted to confirm these procedures. When is it too early to start using them as a startup?
That's a great question. I I think in terms of friends, families, and fools, I don't think it's ever too early. Those would be the ones that I have first. So that means before a website. In America, we have a metaphor, and maybe you have it too, called the back of the napkin idea. And certainly friends, families, and fools are perfect for you to go from, idea to, getting something launched. I will say that, so you have friends, families, and fools you should ask right away, and they should be your first. I would also say that there's a difference between angel investors and venture capitalists. And angel investors are a lot more, what's the word? Well, number one, you have to understand, first of all, what's the difference between an angel and a VC. So a VC, a real venture capitalist does not invest his own money. They only are investing other people's money. Angels, although there are angel funds, but typically an angel is investing his or her own money. Typically, angels are going to be more likely to invest from their heart and more focused on you as the founder and your idea. The hardest thing about VCs is entrepreneurs are raising money to stay alive and feed themselves and feed their team so they could build a company. But VCs don't invest into that. Venture capitalists only want to invest in growth and want to pour gasoline on a fire that has already been lit. So I would not go towards real, not that there's fake and real, but go towards big venture capital money until you can articulate how their money is going to act like gasoline for growth. If you're unsure or you can't even put up a good guess, then you're not ready for venture capital. And you're best going after friends, families, and fools and angels who will provide you capital and some help. Does that answer your question?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Another thing that I forgot to mention in terms of advisors, and this relates to angels. I think one of the things that entrepreneurs do is they get advisors, and maybe there's an agreement, maybe there's not. It doesn't matter. They wind up not following it anyways. So you just wind up putting their headshot on your deck. The one thing that I would say that is a lost opportunity is you should charge people to become advisors. And that's part of your friends, family, and fool round. You should give them equity for it. But, come up with a small package. Hey, we want our advisors to have skin in the game, and we want them to have equity, but we also want it to be a win-win. And we want to have a small investment. Like in US, we would do $5,000 or $10,000. And we would use that as, for them to make a tiny investment and get some equity and be your advisor. But I'm not saying you're going to close everybody that way. You could certainly make exceptions, but it is a lost opportunity in that friends, family, and fool round to not try to charge advisors and request that they buy equity and become your advisor. I thought I saw another hand. No? Okay. All right. So I am going to go through a deck kind of template. And then I'm going to go through actual decks that I have. And I'll make sure I'll post these slides in the chat and you guys can have them. So don't feel like you need to take down a lot of notes. And also, I don't have, I'm only going to go through things that you can't read online or haven't been told. And things to think about, okay? So, number one, you know, our mothers and fathers taught us don't judge a book by its cover, but the reality is we do. And so I absolutely spend a lot of time thinking about what this slide will look like. And I think about, what do I want people to think about me? What do they want me? What do I want them to feel? What do I want them to say to others about me as a startup? And I think it starts right here. Not so much with the name. Believe it or not, I'm not one of those people that believes you need to focus too much on the name. You can always change it. I'm not so certain even the logo matters. But certainly the imagery here and that one-line statement that really gets the investors intrigued. And I think there's different ways to do it. Some people do the Airbnb for or the Uber for. You know, I think there's pros and cons to that. But finding what is that why statement or that emotional component. But it needs to be short. And that's the hard part that requires a lot of intellectual rigor. Okay. Problem statement. I don't feel like I have anything to add. I think everybody understands that you should start with the problem. I do think that another way is you can start with the opportunity. So if you are just attaching, like, is gambling really solving a problem? If you were doing a gambling website, probably not, but there's an opportunity because there's billions of people around the world that gamble. But solution, you know, what is the solution to that problem? And again, that's been widely discussed. Now, what I don't think gets discussed is, and this should be here, but hold on, is nobody wants to be told. You need to show as much as you can. So it's like, here's the compelling problem. It needs to be compelling. Here's what the solution should be. Let me show you our product. And yes, Mr. and Mrs. CEO, you should be able to do this demo or have somebody that can show it and walk through it. If you need to do a video, have a video. But you need to have something where you can show me what you have, not tell me. Now, some of you guys and gals will not have anything to show yet. Then what you need to have here is a case study of before and after. So if this product was Tinder, the dating app, you know, before Tinder, John never had any dates. He would swipe right, swipe left, and then he went on dates. And now his happiness has gone up 50%. So explain what life is like now for the user and what it like will be after, and do a quick case study on a slide. But that's like the last case scenario. Show as much as you can, not tell. And then summarize what are the key benefits to the user, and then get to the traction as much as you can. What are the milestones that you have hit? Now, everyone knows, you know, daily active users, monthly active users, MRR, ARR, you know, and you want to have those, of course. But, you know, how you plant the seed matters. And there's definitely a component of speed that you want to try to instill. So, you know, I would say that if your numbers are not large, hopefully you've been able to get them quickly. So, for example, if I was hold on. Give me 1 second. Okay. Hopefully I think I can edit this one. Okay. So let's just say that you only have 50 users so far on your platform. You can describe that you only have 50 users like this, and that probably isn't the most compelling. Another way you can say is you went from 0 to 50 users in 3 weeks. You know, that's a different statement. So if you can use speed, use it and be proud of that. If you have 1,000 users, from 0 to 1,000 users in a few months, what your growth rate is, and you're growing at A, B, and at X% rate. I mean, if you have 10 users and then you're adding 10 every month, that is a 50% growth rate. So think about how you can plant the seed as best as possible. You know, I think you can also say, you know, recruited a team, built a software, use whatever you can that shows that your idea is good, just like we were talking about yesterday. Okay. The market, you just need to show a big market. In Silicon Valley, we like to see markets that are multiple billions, because the big argument you want to be able to make is there are multiple unicorns in this market. So if it's like a $2 billion market, there's probably not multiple unicorns in there, right? There's probably $1 billion company and several little players. That's not the best market for venture capital. And so think about that. Now, one of the things, and I want to talk, we do a trends and opportunity slide where this basically talks about why now and why this is trending. We look for articles and we put them in here. I think what gets, and I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but I think the things that get missed the most is the business model, the go-to-market strategy, and the roadmap. And it's almost like a foregone conclusion, like go-to-market strategy. I can't tell you how many times I've seen this. Social media, word of mouth, sales. What's another one? Oh, paid search, whatever, right? Emails. And maybe they add some icons and some logos and they beautify this, right? I mean, this to me is not a social media, this is not a go-to-market strategy. And I think this really comes off on like deaf ears. And to me, what you're really trying to prove with the go-to-market strategy is that you put some intellectual rigor in this, and that you have an understanding of what you want to do. And so what I would think about is, let's first change this title. I would do a slide like this. Road to 1 million in ARR if you were early stage, or if you're later stage, road to 100 million in ARR, or it could be road to 1 billion, right? And then what I would try to understand and also articulate to investors is how you are going to achieve this road and achieve this objective. And so if we make it seem a little smaller and reasonable, so road to 1 million in ARR. So if that's what you're going to do, well, just in your planning and in your pitch and how you explain this, you know, how many leads is that per year and per month? This is really ultimately becomes a function of math. And so if you have that many leads, well then, or this could be prospects, depending on, you know, how you get users. And then what is your sales cycle going to look like? Oftentimes in software, there's a first stage, right? And then there's a second stage, especially if you're doing enterprise. And so if you're moving that needle from here to here, and then if you're a SaaS, it's, you know, your churn that's involved, right? And so if you're really going to get to $1 million in ARR, and let's just say for this purposes, we're selling software at 100K, so I need 10 sales. Well, how many leads do I need? I mean, if you're selling something for 100,000, you might say, I need 100 leads or 100 prospects. Okay, and of those 100 prospects, how many are going to make it to that first stage? I don't know, maybe 85. And then of that, you know, maybe 40 make it to this stage, and then we are going to close 10, right? And so what I'm getting at, where I think it's missed, is like, tell me exactly where these 100 leads are going to come from. And then tell me exactly who's going to be here or what technology exists to then convert them at this stage and this stage. Who are the people that are going to be answering the phones? Like, what is the, tell me exactly how all this is going to work in this kind of syndrome where, okay, this is how we're going to get 100 leads. You know, you could really, if you were focusing on leads, so then you could even have a slide, road to 100 leads. All right, so the way we're going to get 100 leads, is we are going to do a Facebook campaign at $1,000 per month equals 5 leads. You know, social media equals, and be able to articulate exactly what that plan is of how you're going to get 100 leads. And then how are you going to convert those leads throughout? Is there going to be an email campaign? Is there going to be a press campaign? Is there going to be a sales training? Or what does that whole funnel look like? And be able to articulate that on how you are going to get to your next round. And then with that, you know, how does your business model support all that? And, you know, I had a very simple business model where I need 10 companies at $100,000. I get to $1 million in ARR. You know, have a very simple business model. Simple is good here. We sell software for $100K per month per year. You know, that's your business model. Try to make it as simple and easy to understand. And so, okay. Now, for the roadmap, I think where a lot of times what happens is people will just say, okay, we're going to make $1 million in revenue. We're going to go from 0 to $1 million. And we're going to do social media. We're going to do paid search. We're going to do whatever. They'll list a few things and poof, it will happen. Well, we all know it doesn't really happen that way. And so I think we all want to know the road. I mean, you want to convince investors that you're going to build this to a big business. So roadmap to $1 billion. We are going to add 100 customers with our connections, experience, and whatever, marketing. In 2022, we are going to X. In 2023, we're going to Y. Like, really explain to the investors what your plans are, what your roadmap is to $1 billion, and why you are that right team, as we were talking earlier, to get to that objective. And like, how are you really going to do it? Think about the how and really put some details. You don't have to have all the answers. In fact, it's totally fine to say, this is what we don't know. And this is what we are, you know, thinking about. But anyways, so I think I hit that one over the head. Competitive landscape, I think a lot of people talk about it. I think the big thing when you talking about competitiveness, you need to explain how you are different than everybody else on the market. You need to explain what makes you different. Do not assume the investor knows your industry or knows how you are different. You have to lay it home how you are different than everybody else on the market. So, have to be different. So I think that's pretty clear, but it's vitally important, especially in meeting number one, for it to be interesting. Don't just say, like, we are the best. What makes you the best? How are you different? Another one for those of you that are using AI is we use AI. That's jargon. I don't know what that means. How do you use AI and how does it make you better and different and unique? Okay, I'm skipping some of this and you can go through this, but I think one of the big things that's a rookie mistake is make sure that you don't put a range for what you're seeking. Be very, very precise. I'm seeking $1.23 million. And I will achieve A, B, and C with that money. Usually it's X users, X revenue, and X one other traction point that's attractive. Like, lay it out for them. And that should correspond with this that you just said, but this is the funding that you are seeking. Now, I'll give you a little hint. Some investors you may read up on write smaller checks or bigger checks than others, and this slide can change, and I think that's fine, but you can't have a range. It make like, which do you need? You need to ask for the range. Now, or not have a range, excuse me. Now, one of the things I would also say, and this is a little controversial, and some people might tell you otherwise, but in my opinion, especially as an early stage entrepreneur, I would not put a valuation. In my opinion, I would not put a valuation. And the reason is I think it's a trap that investors set. And if you don't have a valuation, I'll tell you exactly what will happen most of the time. Investors will say, well, what's your valuation? And you're probably going to wind up telling them a lot of the times. I've seen it happen. But I would encourage you to say to an investor, well, I don't know. You see deals all the time like this. What do you think we're worth? You're the expert. I know that I need 1.3 million to get this many users and this revenue and this traction achievement. I'm not positive yet on what my valuation is. Can you shed some light what you're thinking? And I've just found that to be very, very helpful in terms of your negotiations. And, it really kind of lets, the investor show his or her cards and lets you in on what they're thinking. And so, again, it's a little bit awkward because I think investors will press hard, but I also think it's a trap. And they know what you should be valued at. If they've seen enough deals. Now, the exception to this is if you're going to an angel group. Oftentimes, groups want you to do the valuation, and that's the nature of angels. But definitely with venture capitalists or one-on-one investors, I would say, well, what do you think it's worth? And then once they tell you if it's lower than what you were thinking, say to them, well, how did you come to that? Just so I understand. And listen to the investor and see where they're coming from and see if there's room to negotiate, or you at least know where you stand and you could address it from there. Okay. Who has some questions? No one? Does anyone disagree with me? It's okay if you do.
Any questions or comments for Derrick, Emmanuel, Wale, Emeka, Jalani? Anyone?
If not, no worries. I can show you guys some real decks that I like. Okay, all good. So let me, I stopped sharing. I'm aware of that. Just give me 1 second. All right, so certainly I just kind of went through an order. I know I didn't touch on all of them because it's just too much. And if you guys have questions about your decks, I'm happy to go through them with you. And you can have that link. That there's all different templates, but that template actually didn't come from me. It came from one of our partners. It's this woman here. Her name's Donna Griffith. Donna Griffith is probably like the queen of decks in Silicon Valley. And people that have used her decks have raised $500 million. And here, if you go here, you can find kind of a more thorough explanation, kind of deck by deck. And so what I'll do is I'll just put that here. I just put that in the chat for you guys. And then I'll put that on these slides that I'll send over to you after this chat, okay? Okay. But, so let's just talk. Now, the one thing that I will say, like I said, there's no silver bullet to fundraise. And there's also more than one way to skin a cat, right? And I do want to just point out that there's templates and you could follow those templates, but you can also not follow those templates. And, I know that, I think there's some slides which you should have, but how you tell the story is completely up to you. And I just want to show you that there are other ways to tell the story and just kind of give you some thoughts on some decks that I like. One of the ones that I show a lot, and this applies to companies that don't have a lot of traction yet, but have a great team. And so there is a decision, we showed just now, start with the problem. And I think VCs have drummed that into people's head a little much. And I think the majority of the time you should start with the problem or the opportunity. But another thing that you can do is you can start with the team. And you can start with the team and explain about the journey that you guys have been on, either together or separately, on how you've gotten to this idea. And I really liked this deck. Let me just show it to you. So slide 1 is not the problem. It's not the opportunity. It doesn't even tell you what the company does. It basically says in 2012, we built and flew a plane. They built a drone together. And in 2014, we sold it to Google. So this is basically just going through the bio of the team. And so if you did have a great teammate, and then they built another company, and you don't have to have taken it to NASDAQ, but it could have been another achievement. And then they kind of have a guiding principle. They wanted to build something that meaningfully impact 1 billion lives. That's what they've been seeking out to do. And so I don't really like this slide. I think it takes away the momentum. But then it's like, here, our mission, we're building the world's first security company to impact 1 billion lives. And so, and we're leveraging ultra low cost chip tech and our team's decade of deep manufacturing experience to deliver a 10x cheaper solution that everyone could afford. So you can start with your team and what your all-star team has done, because you didn't recruit the easiest people. You recruited the best people. And you could tell a story how, as the culmination of their careers, you're all seeking to impact 1 billion lives or seeking to change fintech in Nigeria, whatever that case may be. So I just think it's a great way. And then what are these guys? They're just, they're a kind of a boring old security company. I mean, the rest of their deck isn't that great or remarkable or worth going through. But I really, really like that opening, especially if your traction is a little bit lighter and you still are in the idea phase and you do have a great team. Okay, so let me close that one. Some of these I purposely pulled aside and some of them I did not. But we can just go through them because it's in my good deck file. Okay. Now, I know most of you are fintech companies, but if you have an idea that is really far-fetched, or new or different, find a way to define the category. When I talked about like really hit them in the gut, I really like this statement and I really like this opening slide, printing the future. And, that sounds like something I want to be a part of. And here, again, not really the problem or the opportunity. I guess it's maybe an opportunity slide, but it's showing, not telling me. Metal 3D printing has immense potential. Showing these cool images, but also showing rockets in aviation, a big market, not a lot of words or a lot of text. Existing metal, I don't really like AM solutions, but I would say existing metal can only achieve so much, or existing metal are holding the future back. And so I really think that this is just another great way. And then this, again, I would like to see a showing a little bit more. This is telling. So maybe there's like a video or show me exactly what the product is. But I really do like that compelling opening, especially if you're doing something that is, quite frankly, not built yet. You got to show me what the future looks like, or what you're going to do for the banking system or for fintech. Let me just look at some other ones. Base pause, pet health. This is also another interesting way to start, because it's about early detection and diagnostic tests for health for pets. This is a total American company, right? First world problem about the health of pets. But one thing that they've done, and this is kind of what I meant when I was talking about fear of looking stupid. Like, it's pretty radical to be like, talk about pet longevity. I mean, even in America, that's kooky. But what they're saying is there's a lot of it startups in human longevity. So it shouldn't be so far-fetched that we have pet longevity. And that's what I mean about the fear of looking stupid and balancing that, because this is a crazy idea. But what you're saying is, look, there's all these startups around human longevity, so it's not that far-fetched. And what about pet longevity? It's a growing market, 100 billion. There's lots of unicorns in there. Okay. And really kind of explaining the market first, because it is so radical, even showing a story about SoftBank making a large investment. And then kind of getting into what it is, the product that they would achieve and do. And then, like I say, I think this is a little late in the game. I would have liked to have seen this sooner, but this is a good revenue slide, right? They're close to 2 million in revenue in 2019. Maybe you'd like to see a little bit more of a growth rate. And I certainly don't like to have to do the math, but they are showing that kind of hockey stick. So, and again, feel free to, if you have any questions. All right. I don't know why I saved this one. Oh, okay. So this is Countable. They're an enterprise community platform. They're kind of starting with the problem that everyone's leaving Facebook, and that there's a rise of community, branding. It's kind of showing all this. Nothing remarkable here. Brands are struggling to know each other and their audience. We give brands powerful new ways to engage. I mean, this is still just okay, in my opinion. And you could take back and drive results. But this is where it gets interesting, when they're showing clients. So if you do have clients, putting their logos on the slides, especially if you have tier 1 clients, I would absolutely find a way to put logo. And I really see how they're showing year over year bookings, 271% ARR, and these are your clients. I mean, you probably don't know what they do yet as an investor completely, but you almost don't care. Like, you need to meet with them with these kind of numbers and those kind of brands involved. I think there's one more good slide. And again, here's revenue from great users. Again, it doesn't have to be American brands. It could be local brands, but brands that people could relate to. So that's a really good example there. Let's not look at that one. So this is an example of something I don't really love. This doesn't do anything for me. I could barely read this. I don't know what this says. Imagine if this was on your cell phone. It would be even worse. Obviously, I think this is an okay slide. You have children and grandma. I don't know if you need both. I think VCs are a little bit skeptical. I don't know if I really believe kids this age are battling depression. Maybe it's true. But they're building this thing for children. So I guess they have to show it. Let me see if there's anything. Yeah, I'm not really in love with this deck. So whatever you do, don't build this. I do think they have a pretty ambitious thing. They're trying to do social AI and robots. This is kind of what I mean with the timeline, having a phase 1 and explaining. I use the word bouncy ball, how the ball moves. I do think this is good. It's showing, how this will change and what's happening, and then how they're gonna go into actually a clinical robot and what that actual looks like. So showing that intellectual vigor, then going into elderly care. So I think this is good. And then you could back up massive projections and revenue with it. I would have liked to have learned that their traction was this good a little sooner. Sorry, we already saw that one. here is a security deck. The one thing I like about, I don't really like summary slides like this up front. I think they interfere with the story. I do like, there's a lot of competition slides. If you Google them, you can copy them and probably not get a raised eyebrow. But I do like, an added design showing a little extra rigor, not that you just copied a slide and put some logos on it. So again, really saying that it makes it very clear that IREX is the only one that has a complex feature set and collaborative security, and pointing out that like their competition, although some might be complex, but 0 of them have collaborative security. And that again makes it very, very clear on what the value proposition is in terms of competition. Okay, let me just see. One other deck I just want to show you is this deck, Nurture. And depending on the level of planning that you have, this is basically a nursery furniture company. But one of the things I wanted to show you, which I really appreciate, I mean, they're basically just showing how they sell there's things called a glider. Again, it's total first world thing. You sit in this with your children. But one of the things I like is they broke it down into like the introductory kind of conventional pitch, and then they have the opportunity, and then they have the product and broke that down, and then the product map, again, really showing intellectual rigor, the brand, which is important for a consumer product, how they've thought about that. So you can kind of really go through that as a investor, if you wanted to. So I'm going to stop sharing one more time and see if you guys have any questions. Okay. Okay. All right. So what we need to do now that you have a good deck, I just want to give you guys a couple insights into follow-up. So let me just. All right. So a couple things is make sure that you're summarizing and capturing every meeting. We talked about that earlier. We talked about being persistent. We talked about being good at email. A couple other points is if you ever get a commitment from an investor, and there's a few different kinds of commitments, but you must do what I call the email handshake. So let me just start with some of the commitments you'll get. If an investor says, I will invest in you if you have a lead, or if others invest in you, keep going. Say to the investor, oh, that's awesome. So I intend to have a lead in a few weeks. How much would you be willing to invest? If I invest, I will invest in you if you have a lead. Your response without skipping a beat is awesome. I will have a lead very, very soon. How much will you be willing to invest once I have a lead? $50K. Okay. Awesome. Thank you very much. I'll be in touch as soon as I get a lead. Then what you should do is you should do the email handshake. Dear venture capitalists, I heard that once I have a lead, you are in for $50K. Please confirm that I heard you correctly. And get that email. And if they confirm, that is not a binding contract, but it is a very, very strong statement. And then you can start telling people, I have 50 grand committed from so-and-so, and use him or her's name because you want them to get the call. If an investor says, I will invest 3 million at 20% equity and gives you terms, do the email handshake. I would not even wait till you get home. If I was on Zoom, I would multitask and do it on the call. And maybe that's a little crazy, but I would absolutely say, dear VC, I heard that you are investing $2 million at 20% equity with these terms, and I should expect a term sheet next week. Did I hear you properly? Yes or no? Like, get that email handshake. And if they misheard you, then correct it over. If you misheard, then correct it over email. What did I hear? I'm sorry that I misheard that. Like, let's resolve, but certainly capture that. The big thing that I would say is we spend so much time on the deck, but ultimately the deck is really just designed to get the meeting. And those of you that have been in many venture capital meetings can go a bunch of different ways, but ultimately it's the questions that make or break whether you get funded. It's the questions and the follow-up. And it's really hard to prep you for every question. I do think that all the things that you've heard, growth, team, all that applies. But I think one of the things that doesn't get mentioned enough is that we're all long-winded as entrepreneurs, and we all want to give the backstory. We all believe that if the investor just knew every detail that I knew, they would surely invest. And I would just say that that's usually not true. And you need to balance giving investors the entire story, but also taking up too much time and them not getting to their questions. You don't have to answer every question perfectly, but you should come off as if you've thought about it before and you put some intellectual rigor behind what you're working on. Or if you haven't, admit that you haven't and use that as a way to move that needle to the right as a coachable moment. Hey, that's a great idea. I never considered that. And then follow up and tell them that you considered it and this is what we're doing. Show the investor that you don't necessarily have everything. But I do think if you're going to stress about any point, I wouldn't stress so much about the presentation, but about the questions that they are going to ask as follow-up. And, that's where you would really, really want to be prepared. How do you be prepared? Well, one thing you can do is you can call founders who that investor's invested in before and ask them how they would address questions. You can practice with, friends and mentors and just be as well read and well versed as you can. The other thing is getting up to speed on VC language as quick as possible does help. What's the difference between run rate and revenue? A lot of entrepreneurs screw that one up all the time, and it just makes them look like they're throwing jargon out. If you're going to use jargon, and we all do, make sure that it's inclusive, meaning it's something that people can rally around and they understand. It's not industry jargon that an investor might not understand, but also make sure that you're right in using it in the right way, and what run rate is. So when we talk about being good at email, we spoke about this earlier, but I wanted to kind of show you guys in terms of follow-up. And, a couple things that I want you to wrap your head around, because again, we get focused on deck. And, this email is a little bit longer than I would like, but it was following an 1.5-hour call with the VC. And, really, and I'll show you what happened also as a relation to that meeting. Hold on, let me turn on the light. I realize it's dark in here. But this is a great meeting. Xcoop is best positioned to disrupt current archaic players for several reasons. It lists the points. Our current projections are not taking into account, these expansions, using that bold. And, he actually screwed up his ask, but these are he's raising $10 million for 8 million users, 520 million transactions, and 33 million in net revenue. So that's the kind of crisp and concise follow-up following a meeting. And there's a meeting already set, but they're in final due diligence stage of doing it. One of the other things I wanted to show you is, and part of the reason we say you need to be good at presentations is, not just because of the first deck, but oftentimes that you'll have a second and a third and a fourth deck that you need to make for each VC. And depending what stage you're at, sometimes VCs will create presentations about you. And the problem with doing that is you're on the VC schedule, which usually isn't the same as yours. But this, for example, is a 33-page presentation that a venture capitalist firm put together for this fintech company in Latin America. But these are things that theoretically the companies could do. Now, when I'm saying there's decks 2, 3, and 4, typically they are deep dives into the revenue and users of the company. And this might be a little bit more advanced, but when I say questions, these are when people are really going to dive in and ask questions. And you're not going to always have all the answers and know all of them. But I think the takeaway with this is, one, you could build this yourself. And two, this is where you make your money, so to speak. The opening meetings is getting them emotionally connected, but at some point in time, their logic brain is going to have to connect to their emotional brain. And how you answer those questions, moving the needle for yourself, your team, and your product is ultimately where I would encourage you to focus, or at least I don't hear enough noise about in other blogs and other readings that you guys can do. And so, that in itself is my my presentation. I will stop sharing for a moment. I will paste these slides in the chat. And if you guys have any questions about anything as it relates to your fundraising, I am happy to answer them as soon as I'm done pasting this. Hang on. I have to, yeah, okay. All right, so there, it's a Dropbox. It should work. If not, contact me and I can, email it to you. But you should be able to take that link and then download it later. So, any questions, comments, or complaints? Okay. Well, if you guys don't have anything, like I said, I am more than happy to talk to you individually. I posted my link tree with all my contact info, and keep me posted on how your fundraising goes. But have a great day. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Derrick, for your time today. I'm sure the participants have had a chance to really think through some of the strategies that they have internally put in place towards fundraising, and will definitely be coming back to you with any questions that they may have. Thank you so much for all that you've shared with us today. It's been very, very insightful.
Awesome. Thanks. And I didn't realize I didn't have my camera on this whole time. I was like using my 1s and 2s. But anyways, this is what I look like. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you, Derrick.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.